Sure, you'll find the next presentation interesting. Susan Fiske is going to give a talk now that I won't try to describe it.
Well, thank you to the organizers. I really appreciate being here. I have to say that this is maybe now for something completely different. I'm a social psychologist. I don't do biomedical research per se. And the organizers invited me to talk about agents of cultural behavior change. And I had to call them up and say, what do you mean by that? And what do you think I know about that? But then, over the last year, I stumbled into a domain of methods blogs, and it struck me that it was an important domain to talk about here. So, and I want to thank my two collaborators, if I can figure out how to work the... Oh, okay. So Gandalf Nicholas, who is sitting in the fourth row, so anything that's wrong with the data you can ask him about, and Bai, who is also working on this. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you some background on an encounter with social media, and then talk about how social media get used in social psychology and psychology more generally as a form of methods critique. And then we decided to take an empirical approach and look at the methods content in blogs. It's kind of a promissory note because we're only beginning to do this, and we're going to be doing it more over the next couple months. So, cultural behavior change. So, just for a little bit of perspective, I'm old enough to remember when I was coming out of graduate school that there was a crisis in social psychology. There were symposia on the crisis in social psychology. The problems identified included flashy studies that only a few labs could replicate, and no real-world relevance. So for some of us, that sounds kind of familiar. This is not to dismiss the current set of issues. Quite the contrary. It's to say that there was behavior change, some of which was permanent, some of which was not. The field of social psychology and psychology more generally got educated about effect sizes and power analysis, which were not that salient before, and those have kept with the field, I would say, as norms. And then the relevance part, an area that I work in, which is social cognition, came in and was sort of an antidote to flashy studies at first because it was drawing from rigorous cognitive psychology. You know, I would say over several decades it devolved parts of it into flashy studies again. But, and then the field of health psychology showed that we were serious scientists and could have an impact on the real world. So all I'm saying is that fields have crises, and sometimes those can be edifying and you can learn from it, and there's various ways of persuading people to change their habits. And I'm going to argue for one set. So here's how I got involved in the current crisis. The Association for Psychological Science, the president, Susan Golden Meadow, called me up at the beginning of last summer, and she said, "Did you know that there's a problem of viciousness on methods blogs?" And I said, "Yeah, I do actually, because I know several people who've been targets on these blogs." And she said, "Would you write about this?" That's sort of equivalent to saying, would you put a big red target on your back? And I knew that when I agreed to do it, but I decided that I was less vulnerable than the people that I knew about who were being targeted, and I'm also foolish, maybe. So I wrote a column for the newsletter of the APS Observer, a call to change science's culture of shaming. Now this is the tame version. There was unfortunately an early draft that had more inflammatory language in it. So I was upset about what was going on. That created a firestorm of online response. So what I said in the end, absent the inflammatory language, was that peer critiques are desirable to have in a variety of outlets, but they're different in social media because of the sheer volume and speed of the critiques. And in some circumstances, they can be personal and insulting in ways that face-to-face commentary would not be. And even peer reviews that an editor is vetting are less likely to be so personal and insulting. And they can be, again, not all of them by any means, but more toxic and damaging. And, you know, I pointed out that most of these critics are constructive, but even the most constructive critics are not being formally vetted or reviewed. They're sort of crowdsourcing of whether they're saying something sensible or not because people comment on it, but it's not a formal review process. And there is this minority trend to be vicious, which has, I would argue, a chilling effect on the online environment, especially for some people, especially the people who feel that it's a personalized attack. And I would argue that this undermines science as a community of trust. So this is what I said. And by the way, Gandalf is not responsible for my opinions. So I just want to make that clear. Well, the effect was what you might expect. People piled on. They talked about what a terrible human being I was. I won't re-traumatize myself by repeating all the insults. But at the same time, I received literally 100 emails within 48 hours from people who said, "Thank you, I was afraid to say this." Now, I understand that's not an unbiased sample, but I'm saying that there are people out there who were afraid to say what I had said. And then there was a petition that was put up, not specifically mentioning me, but the timing was suspicious. And it collected 657 signatures about the atmosphere in online media and affirming a set of shared principles of civil conduct. So this is all just to say, you know, this talk is not about me, but just as an example of a way of improving methods, which for the most part can be very useful and give a lot of people voices, but a minority of people can also make it really toxic. So we're talking about two kinds of behavior change then. We're talking about how do you get researchers to behave better in terms of methods and statistics, which is what we've been talking about this whole time, and also then how do you get the minority of people who misuse those platforms. But I'm really focusing on researchers here, so that's really what this talk is about, and what are the promises and pitfalls of using social media in this way. So when you think about changing behavior of a community of scientists, and that's what we've been holding out as an ideal, how do you do that? Well, you can reward and punish them. And the Association for Psychological Science has badges since May 2014. They gave me the numbers. They said 30% of the people who publish in psychological science have badges for posting their data, 23% for posting their materials, but only 2% are willing to pre-register their hypotheses. So I think what's happening is people are voting with their feet, you know, and more people I think will be willing to post their data and post their materials, but I don't see a big future in pre-registration, but maybe other people have other ideas about how to get people to do that. They told me that 34% of the articles cumulatively have at least one badge, and maybe they suggested there was a trend for more badges. Okay, so let me just do one page of social psychology of influence. There are different ways that social influence works, and they have different effects in the short term and the long term, different mechanisms. Badges are one form of incentive that gets compliance in the short run. Requiring people to do certain things to submit an article to a certain journal gets them to comply in that instance. So people comply when they're under surveillance for the reward or punishment that they're subject to. But it's not a long-lasting form of social influence, because when they go to another venue, they stop doing that. There are two more long-lasting ones. Another one is conformity with group norms. If you think that your identity as a scientist is, oh, now we're all worried about replicating our results, then if I take that in as a norm in my reference group and I continue to identify as a scientist, which we hope for most of us is a pretty long-term identity, then that kind of conformity will continue. But it depends on believing that other people are doing it and that the norms are changing. And then the most long-lasting form of influencing people is providing them with information and persuading them of values. And then they think about it and they say, yeah, that's right. And that's internalization. That lasts a really long time. And so I think that that's what our goal needs to be. And I think most of us are here because we believe in the value of information and evidence. So let's look at social media as influence agents. I think the aim is, I'm talking about within, like methods, commentaries, and professional situations. We'll put aside your Facebook account to talk to your family. That's separate. So I think social media aim to convey information, and they aim for that last level of influence, primarily, internalization of arguments. But of course, these arguments are not formally vetted, they're crowdsourced. And the response can be very rapid, but that doesn't make it right. And so I just want to raise that as a caveat. They also operate on the level of sociality. Social media are well known for including and excluding people. They aim for leverage by way of identification if you join a group on a particular topic of interest. So those identities are more fluid. People can join the group, and then they can decide the group is not them and their friends, and they can leave it. And these groups can promote ostracism. So that's a double-edged sword. And then, of course, there's reward and punishment even on social media. So sometimes people get praised and held up as exemplars, or studies get praised. But sometimes there's shaming and ad hominem attacks. And the compliance in this case is because people are afraid of being punished. And you'll see some data in a minute about that. So just in January, it's one of these things that snowballs. Suddenly I'm like an expert on climate, or at least willing to open my mouth about it. Maybe that's more accurate. So some people who became experts in the Society of Personality and Social Psychology decided to do a survey of members of our field on who uses social media for scientific reasons, because this commotion was going on among players in social psychology. So here's a squashed, no, it's not squashed view, good. Okay, so career stage, who uses social media? You can see that the blue part is the tenured faculty, and then the green part is industry, but then the majority of people who are using social media for scientific reasons are untenured and earlier career stage people. So that probably isn't a surprise to anybody in the room, but I think it's worth bringing up because we're talking about the next generation. And it's important, how people are learning their methods and learning their values about science. So it's trainees and untenured faculty who are primarily using social media by their own self-report. Men more than women report using it. And on average, they're checking science social media once a day, which seems interesting to me. If you ask them is social media important for scientific conversation, men say it's more important than women, and younger career people say more than older career people. So that's consistent with their behavior. Who actually participates actively? People report commenting or tweeting less than once a month, but men report doing it more than women. And they say in general, people say that they're posting in order to learn and to help their career, particularly men. I'm not going to give a lot of opinions about these. I don't want to overinterpret what people say, but the facts are what they are. People report that they don't post because they have no time to do it. What they post as commentary might be wrong, or that it might damage their reputation. And untenured people are particularly concerned about that. How do they report getting treated? They say they're respected on a 5.33 on a scale of 7 points. That is, sometimes to mostly they feel respected. They feel attacked, 2 on a 7-point scale, especially men. Of course, they're the ones who are on more. So, they report feeling interested and intellectually fulfilled, so that's why they're checking once a day. But they also report feeling anxious, and then some of them report feeling schadenfreude, malicious glee, especially men. So here's the thing that I think is really impactful to me. What effects does it have on you to see somebody to either be attacked or seeing other people be attacked? So people report wanting to disengage from the field, especially when they see other people being attacked in social media. So I think that's important. Okay, so what I want to spend the rest of my time doing, besides answering your questions, is a sort of feasibility demonstration of content analysis of the methods blogs, because enough with opinions already. So we've got other people's opinions about why they're on social media for methods, and we had my own opinions, which got me in trouble. And so I'm a scientist. I'd rather have information that's, verifiable. So we've undertaken some scraping of these blogs, and then we're beginning to analyze them. And what I'm going to show you now is only our first preliminary stage. And we would be happy to have input and suggestions about ways to go with this. So we had a blog sample identified by 6 judges within social and personality psychology. There are 43 blogs that they all agreed were psychology methods blogs. We're going to look at 9 of them now, which were the ones that they said were the most salient. And they're on this, you can find them here. So I should say, Gandalf and Bai, scraped and pre-processed these blogs, including editing down to the roots of the words. We obtained averages per blog and frequencies by categories so far. And we're in the process of identifying idiosyncrasies about particular blogs that set them apart from the other ones, which will enable us to look at correlations in what's distinctive about a blog and then other features of the blog's influence. So we coded the top 22 terms that were raw in terms of raw cross blogs and then distinctive to particular blogs. The first set of categories we were interested in was how much are these people talking about methods, and that wasn't hard to code in terms of what are methods and statistics words. And then we separated out professional terms like journal, publication, editor, words like that. Then there were people words that were about authors and researchers, and then other, which is not an important category. We also have done some preliminary sentiment analyses on positivity and negativity separately. So I thought this was more fun than a real chart. The good news from the blog's point of view is that the most frequent terms are about methods. They're writing about studies and effects and results, and data and power and size. So, I find this, assuming that it holds up for the 43, which I think it will, they say they're writing about methods, and this looks like they are. In terms of the coding, another way to look at it, the same data is the blue is the methods, the red is other, the green is people in terms of authors and researchers being named that way, and then the purple is professional. So there's a big range. If you look to the large part of the key, the range on methods, for a methods blog to be only 33% about methods is a little surprising, but some of them are giving people professional advice. So I wouldn't judge that too much. And some of them are all the way up to 86%. So there's some range, but the majority of it is about methods as advertised. The valence is more negative than positive. That was sort of my impression, that people are more about criticizing. I don't think we can absolutely draw that conclusion yet, but it's consistent with the idea that people are more about criticizing than praising. And the emotions, so trust, issues about trust, feelings of trust, surprise, joy. So these are more positive emotions, although surprise, I guess, depends. One of these people said, I just did a post hoc power analysis of Fiske's research, and I'm surprised to see that she has enough power in her studies. So I guess surprise might not always be positive. But there's a certain amount of sadness, fear, disgust, and anger going on too. So that's worth noting. Okay, so, like I said, this is a promissory note. We're working on this project. They do seem to be mostly about methods. Sometimes they're about specific researchers and authors. That might be okay, it might not be okay. More negative than positive, and a mix of emotions. So I'm not making any judgment about it, but just to tell you where we might be going. So this is somebody's EEG. No, this is, these are 3 of the blogs. You can see that they vary in how polarized they are, how dense they are. Like the one on the bottom is like incredibly prolific and almost broke my computer downloading the file. Also, the average amount of negativity, the balance between the positive and negative, varies a little bit across these. And when we have 43, I think we'll see more variance on these things. So this is suggestive about some of the things that one could correlate with other things to make a better description of what's going on. So future analyses, using these kinds of foci, this is not a pre-registration, by the way. I'm just saying these are things that a person might look at, and I'll be clear about that in the write-up. One might want to predict influence. So this is a question we've been grappling with, and I'd be open to suggestions. It's not that easy to get how many followers a blogger has. Almost all the people, at least in the sample so far, have Twitter accounts. So you could look at the number of Twitter followers. That's easy to get, right? So I wonder whether certain characteristics of blogs make a person generate more Twitter followers. That would be possible to get a reputation of one kind or another. But I'm open to other suggestions you guys have that would be interesting to see about what makes a methods blog influential, because that was my task here. Thanks, you guys. Try to document some forms of influence. Okay, well, done early. This is the lab. Thank you to the lab. And we're happy to take questions and suggestions for future directions.